Well, I don't know about you, but I don't really like LED lights all that much at home. I prefer incandescent lights. Mine tend to mysteriously go on and off for no good reason. When my old incandescent lights were always on until they finally died, and then that was it, you replace them. I don't like the idea that some of the states are mandating that we buy electric vehicles when it's not clear at all that electric vehicles are really going to be better for the environment in the long run than the ones we already have, which have been optimized through catalytic converters, etc., to minimize air pollution, while at the same time being very easy to assemble and manufacture and source the parts for, unlike electric vehicles, which often require difficult and rare elements in their electronic components. So I don't like any of that stuff, and I especially don't like it because there is no clear evidence right now that we have any need for it. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that this current state of climate hysteria is causing more problems than it's helping. In particular, it's getting in the way of helping poor nations by providing them with cheap, readily available power, such as coal and oil and natural gas and such things, that would help lift them out of poverty, all for the sake of climate hysteria ideology. When again, we don't have good evidence that what's happening with the climate and how much we really have to do with that at all. Now, that may seem very strange to you because incessantly in the news is pushed that we know that the earth is warming and that all these bad things are going to happen and mankind is going to die and all these animals are going to die. The first thing is that throughout history, the species have gone extinct, the weather has changed, the climate has changed. I remember when I was visiting my daughter in Ohio, and we went out in a field and I found fossils from seashells, because the middle of the United States used to be covered with water at one point. We worry about the glaciers melting, but there's been times in Earth's history when the entire Earth was tropical, and other times when the entire Earth was much closer to a snowball than anything else. And you'll find references online to two periods of time when the Earth might have been essentially a snowball, and life really can't survive very well under those conditions. It's much easier in a tropical Earth than it is on a snowball Earth. In fact, I can only hope at some point that all this global warming that we worry about so much and talk about so much might one day save us from some really awful catastrophe when we enter our next ice age, which we certainly will at some point, because the Earth's history is a history of ice ages alternating with warm periods. Our last ice age didn't really end that long ago. They say about 10,000 years ago. Although I would argue that the existence of the glaciers even now suggests we're just tapering out of that ice age. And the warming we're seeing on the Earth is a part of the normal evolution of the Earth, independent of whatever man's doing. It's possible we're increasing that somewhat, but the issue is then, so what? Does that do anything bad? So the glaciers melt, sea levels rise a little bit, and we have new land where the glaciers used to be. Where permafrost used to be. All that land of ice and snow that we can't live on now and grow crops on now may one day become fertile land. And so humanity may need to move around a little bit, but that doesn't mean that humanity is at all going to suffer for it or going to die from it. We might actually benefit from global warming in the long run. It's hard to tell. But even more important in all these arguments is whether we can actually predict climate at all. We know, as a fact, that we can only predict the weather about 2 weeks out. After that, the best supercomputer on the planet can't predict any better than chance. So you wonder if we can't predict the weather more than 2 weeks out. And you know, we've all had experiences where the weatherman says it's going to rain tomorrow, then it doesn't rain, or the weatherman says it's going to be sunny, and then it pours. We've all had experiences where we're told that, for instance, where I live here in Mississippi, Biloxi, Mississippi on the coast, we're told it's going to be a difficult hurricane season or lots of hurricanes, and then it turns out to be a dud, essentially, which is great for us. And there aren't any big hurricanes coming our way. These things can't really be predicted. And the reason they can't, and the reason is because weather is based on nonlinear dynamic principles. Okay, let me explain that. It means that, for instance, if you look at flipping a coin and you can predict down the line that you have a 50-50 chance of getting a head or a tail. And you might have a run where you've got 5 or 10 heads in a row, but ultimately that's going to average out. That's a linear phenomenon that you can graph with a straight line. And the same thing occurs when you're looking at the height of people, which follows a normal curve that, at most people aggregate in the middle at the average height, and then it tapers off on either side very evenly. And you could predict, at least with the population, what's going to happen. Nonlinear or chaotic phenomena are very different. It's like a marble on top of a mountaintop. Once you put it right on that point of the mountain, you don't know which way it's going to go as it travels down the mountain. And each time you repeat it, it might go a different route. And in fact, although it's not random, it's not predictable. And here's the facts. The best mathematicians on the planet, the best computers on the planet, can't even predict the turbulence of one river flowing over one set of rapids. They can't predict what that water is exactly going to do at any particular moment. They can't even do it very well in a laboratory setting with a flow of water through a container, which causes turbulence, causes the water to mix around, because turbulence, again, is a non-linear dynamic phenomenon. Now imagine all the rivers in all the world, and all the rivers of ocean currents that occur, and all the rivers of air in the atmosphere at various levels. Imagine the rivers of magma that flow beneath us, the plate tectonics, the movement of the plates of the Earth, the effect of the sunspots on our Earth and its atmosphere, the effect of the gravitation of the sun, and how the spin of the Earth can change over time. And imagine all these factors, and you begin to realize, how in the world can anyone say we can predict what the climate's going to be when all these things have an influence on the climate? Now, some people argue, well, although you can't predict the weather out more than 2 weeks, the climate is looked at over decades. So people say that you need to look out at least 30 years when you're talking about climate. So maybe you can just kind of look at the averages, and they say, well, that we basically know that summer is going to be hotter than winter, and that in spring the leaves are going to come out, and in autumn they're going to fall. So isn't that something that we can depend on? Isn't that like climate? Well, no. For one thing, the seasons are determined by our rotation around the sun, and that's an overwhelmingly strong influence, which tends to cause the basic seasonal patterns. However, we don't know if it's going to be a particularly warm winter or a cold winter full of icy rain, or if the summer is going to be particularly hot or cold, or if the spring is going to come early this year or not. Those are all unpredictable because they're based on many other factors besides just the variation of sunlight as we go around the sun. So all those little factors can add up, and not unlike that marble falling from the top of the mountain, rolling down the side of the mountain. One tiny little change can cause a very large change by the time the marble reaches the bottom of the mountain. And predicting that is literally impossible. You can make all kinds of models, but actually predicting it, especially when you have numerous nonlinear dynamic factors interacting together, they don't average out, they multiply. They increase your chance of not being able to predict things. So all this climate hysteria is exactly that. We don't know what the climate's going to do. Interestingly, I saw on a kind of a liberal website the statement that the Earth is greener now than it has been ever, that it's been getting greener over the last several decades. And this is in spite of rainforests being cut down to make way for people, and the population growth causing, again, general reduction in areas of foliage and building houses, etc. And the reasons they give is that, well, we have more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere now. And carbon dioxide is a natural fertilizer for plants. The leaves are springing up all over the place. And of course, those leaves are going to change that carbon dioxide back to oxygen. So nature has its way of correcting things, even when we don't predict for it. I don't think people predicted, or many people predicted, that the Earth would be getting greener while we're going through deforestation and other things. And yet that seems, from satellite imagery, to be what's going on. So again, I think all this is very difficult to predict. And It really is a disservice to people to go on and on as if we're going to all die and everything in the world is doomed because of climate change. The climate's going to change with or without anything we do. It's going to change. You can't stop that. What we can adapt to pretty much any climate change. And I don't think there's any reason to feel that things are going to get terribly worse. I'm 65 now, and when I was in grade school, we were told that the Earth was doomed because the population by the year 2000 would be so big the Earth wouldn't be able to sustain it. And exactly the opposite is true. The population did grow, and it continues to grow, but it's leveling out, and over the next 50 years it's going to start decreasing again. And it decreases because as people become wealthier, and the world has become wealthier overall, they start having less children. And that's one reason why we should go ahead and let them use coal or oil or whatever it takes so that their civilization and their culture can rise to a level where they can control their reproduction and can enjoy the world as it is, and then can afford other ways of generating power, and besides ways that tend to pollute more. So I don't think we have anything particularly to fear. And so where does all this panic come from? Well, I think it basically reflects the internal psychology of the people who are saying all these things. In other words, they're projecting out their own fears, their own insecurities, and acting as if the world is falling apart, when really what they fear the most is inside of themselves. What's going on is that they're falling apart on the inside, and they're trying to stabilize themselves, make themselves feel more stable by saying it's really all on the outside, and trying to get a lot of other people on board with them to support their worldview, which would then give them a sense of reassurance, and all the panic they're feeling has a known cause out there that everyone can get together and fix. When in reality, I think most of the people who are panicking about the climate are going through a psychological distress and projecting outward. You see in the news things like, oh, this wildfire is evidence of climate change, or this hurricane is evidence of climate change. Of course, none of that's true. How do you know any of that? You can't. I think about the Dust Bowl in the 1930s that maybe was caused by ocean temperature changes, but that might have nothing to do with humans at all. But it was a huge problem during the Depression and wiped out millions of families in Middle America. Or the San Andreas Fault and the big earthquake in Middle America in 1811 and 1812 that made the Mississippi River flow backwards for a time. Those weren't because of climate change. You look throughout history and you see times of huge climate change that had nothing to do with humanity. And so, why do people keep seeing all this stuff as having meaning? Well, we have a term for that in psychiatry. It's called ideas of reference. And this is common among psychotic individuals, where they'll see a brown car go by and think that, oh, that means the FBI is watching me. Or they'll see a sequence of numbers on license plates and feel that has special meaning for them, that the universe is giving them a special message. And I think this is what's basically happening with all the climate people out there, the climate hysterics, is we're talking not just about climate hysteria, but about climate psychosis, that people are going overboard in their fears and seeing the boogeyman behind every corner, when there is no boogeyman. It's in their own imagination. So if you've listened through to this point, my main advice is relax. It's going to be okay. Don't worry so much about the climate. Sure, we don't want someone polluting our water. We can't drink fresh water. We don't want someone making the air stink, or where it becomes hazardous to us in a very direct and obvious way. We want to clean up the streams that might have these forever plastics in them, because they probably do have some impact on our life. But as far as the climate's concerned, if the glaciers melt, it's not the end of the world. It's a change, and we'll adapt to it. And it may be a good change in the end. That's what it's really impossible to know when change comes what the ultimate effect will be. So there's no point in worrying about it, and no point in going crazy about it. And I would like to buy some incandescent light bulbs in the future. And I don't want to have to drive an electric car, which is just a souped up golf cart from my childhood. I want to be able to drive an efficient but gasoline vehicle. And I think everyone should be able to do that. I don't think it's going to ruin the planet at all. So that's my thoughts for this week. Hope you have a good week.